famous people in that video up here on the stage. I get to introduce them. So this is Nicole Baldonado, and she is the coordinator and the program director of the Hope Groups. And she and her husband, she's lived in Ukraine most of her life. They found themselves having to escape as refugees along with everyone else when the invasion started, and are now living with their 3 children in Poland. So she's a great person to help lead this. This is Sydney Tucker, and after spending about 4 years working in Southeast Asia with churches and ministries, she went and got a master's degree and now is an epidemiologist and biostatistician, and she's working day and night to do the analyses that we need on the Hope Groups. And then we have Zhenia, who you just saw and heard from on the video. She has founded a new organization called There Is Hope Foundation. Don't you love the name of it? And she also is a coordinator and a facilitator for the Hope Groups. And then we have Lyudmyla Bryn, and Lyudmyla is the director of an organization very known and respected in children in Ukraine called Children's Mission. She also is an expert in child psychology and trauma-informed care for children, and her role in the Hope Groups formation has been instrumental. So Nicole will facilitate a panel, and you'll get to learn more about them.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you all for being here today. Lyudmyla, I would love to hear a little bit about your personal story and how it led you to begin working on developing the Hope Groups.
Thank you. Hello to everybody. So I was one of 13 million Ukrainians who had to fled their homes when the full-scale Russia's invasion began back in February 2022. And so I had to flee my home city of Kyiv because, first of all, the danger for my life, but also because I'm a Christian leader, so I knew that if Kyiv will be occupied, that I will be persecuted. So I had to kind of save my life in that direction. And so I spent 2 months in the western Ukraine, and I was lucky. I managed to go home, to return home to Kyiv, unlike many other millions of Ukrainian ladies who never and still cannot do that.
Thank you for sharing your story. Can you tell us how you ended up going from Kyiv then to being with Ukrainian refugees in Poland?
Oh, yes. Susan was looking for a Ukrainian lady to help her understand what Ukrainian refugees feel. And so as an expert in child psychology and the Ukrainian, I was invited to the place called Zator in Poland, near Krakow. It was one of the hundreds of shelters in Poland and other European countries, but it was like a 5-star hotel, very untypical, I would say. So people there were quite lucky, all the nice facilities they had. But when we went there, we talked to them, we listened to these ladies. I tried to play with children, draw together with them. And I realized that people were lost. These ladies and children, they were depressed, they were anxious about what is happening in Ukraine with their relatives back home, with a lot of them who totally lost the hope to return back because they lost their homes and the place where they can return to. So we spent those 3 days and we realized that something is needed to be developed to support those ladies, because if ladies are supported, they can give support to their children. And that must be done very urgently. So that's how the idea for Hope Groups was born.
Thank you so much, Lyuda. And I'll share a little bit more about my role in the beginning of the Hope Groups. As Susan shared, I was a missionary child in Ukraine, and then a missionary and social worker myself, along with my husband and our 3 children who are here with us today. And we found ourselves with millions of other Ukrainians displaced because of the war. And in the first few weeks and then the first couple of months, we got connected to the same shelter not by accident, in Zator. And I began meeting there with a small group of Ukrainian women, and along with my mom, who is also a missionary still living in Ukraine today. We met with these same women, and I connected with Susan, Dr. Hillis, and Luda, and we began to, as Luda said, listen to the needs. And the needs that the women said, we need to understand what is trauma and how it impacts us, and how it impacts our children, and how we can help them. And so after listening to those needs and recognizing them in my own life as a mom going through this situation, we used the evidence-based resources developed by Parenting for Lifelong Health for parenting in crisis, and then adapted them along with this group of Ukrainians to be relevant for Ukrainian culture and the circumstances. And we piloted this with about 350 Ukrainian women. The initial group went on to be facilitators, and they just continue to grow. And then Zhenia is going to share a little bit more about how they grew beyond that. But Zhenia, can you tell us a little bit more about how your personal experience, which we saw in the video, led you to get involved in Hope Groups?
As you've seen, when I was replaced, I found the situation that people were so very lost. They were absolutely lonely because they were replaced. They didn't know what to go. They needed to adapt in new surroundings. And it was very, very easy to get people, whenever I made an announcement on any group or Facebook, that some support groups are starting, I had a lot of willing people to join. So the Hope Groups were really like organic, natural, and they grew instantly. Yeah, so I just, little by little, I started gathering the groups, and also looking through my contacts in my hometown, Rivne. I was looking for facilitators who could lead the groups there, and among the people, my friends who fled from the war to other countries, and also Nicole's friends and contacts, and this is how it started.
Thank you, Zhenia. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the groups grew from there?
Well, as soon as we were done with the 4 sessions, with the 4 first sessions, the relationships in the groups grew so much close, and they were so friendly, and they were so family-like that nobody wanted to leave. They wanted to meet again and again, and they wanted to share with everyone that these Hope Groups are like really healing. They were encouraged, these women, they were inspired, and they were healed from their transition stress, and that's why more and more people wanted to join. This is how my branch of Hope Groups in Krakow, it grew into a community of more than 1,000 people, and now all of them want to participate, want to help each other. And actually, we're still meeting with my first ladies in my first groups, and they actually became, as a fact, themselves as facilitators. And they have even met, like a year has passed since they facilitated that group, and they had a reunion with their co-participants. So I have seen that Hope Groups have united so many people across the world, and also Ukrainians from different part of Ukraine. We got to know each other, and we became a lot closer.
Thank you so much, Zhenia. As Zhenia said, we went from 4 sessions, and you can see the session titles on the screen. And we looked at how to help these parents learn to cope with their own trauma and their children and their children's trauma. And then we added the additional sessions in response to the requests from people among the people that we were working with. And they said, we need these additional topics, so we added them. You can see some more photos here of the wonderful groups and the wonderful community that has grown in all over Europe and all over Ukraine. And It's interesting, we initially created the Hope Groups intending to work with Ukrainian women and children who had been displaced outside of their country. What we found was shortly after we had begun the pilot, we began getting requests from our partners in Ukraine, Ukraine Without Orphans and Nehemiah Team Ukraine, to offer the Hope Groups for internally displaced Ukrainians, as well as those who had either returned to their homes or remained home and never left. And so the programs just organically and naturally grew, and it was really something. It's beautiful to watch. And we continue to see that those who went through the groups saw the impact on their own lives and then wanted to be able to bless others with that same impact. And so many participants have gone on to become facilitators. We've trained about 100 Ukrainians in multiple countries to lead Hope Groups, and to this date, about 2 years since we started, we've served over, I don't like saying we've served, we've worked with, we've supported, we have been in these groups together with more than 2,000 people, and it just continues to grow. We've seen a lot from the testimonies that participants and facilitators share about how the Hope Groups have impacted their relationships, their families, their parenting. And we realized quickly that as it was growing, there was a need to evaluate this. And so again, as we had been working with Parenting for Lifelong Health and their amazing tools, we partnered with Oxford University to also conduct research to evaluate how effective the Hope Groups truly were being. And so I'd like to ask Sydney to share a little bit about that. But before I do, I also wanted to share that because we have seen such amazing impact from the Hope Groups, we have begun to adapt them for other cultures outside of Ukraine, realizing that just as we went from working with those who had been externally displaced to those who were internally displaced and those who were home, these concepts, these tools are very relevant for people in various types of crises. So we've already adapted them in the nation of Colombia in South America to support surviving parents or caregivers of children who have lost one or both parents. And we're currently looking at adapting for other parts of the world as well. So Sydney, I would love for you to share a little bit about why you think and why you believe evaluation is so important of these types of programs.
Sure, happy to. So I'll start with sharing a verse in Matthew 25 we're all very familiar with. It says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little, I will set you over much." And this verse is in the context of a group of servants who were given a set number of talents or resources, capabilities, and those who invested them wisely and returned double what they were given. The response was, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And for us, we also have a limited number of resources, of time, of funding, of capacity. And I think there's a question for us also of how can we be faithful servants? And specifically in this context, how can we invest our lives in making the greatest contributions we can to improving the lives of children? And to do that, I think we have to know if our programs are working, and we have to measure if they're changing the outcomes that we care about changing, so that we can invest our lives in programming that can really make a difference for children.
Thanks, Sydney. And then can you share a little bit about how we evaluated the Hope Groups and how we are still evaluating the Hope Groups and what we're seeing in terms of how they're actually impacting parents and children?
Yes, of course. So you can look with me at the figure on this slide. And to give an overview, since I can't go through all of this, we've measured the impact of Hope Groups on caregiver mental health outcomes, on parenting outcomes, and on violence against children outcomes, and then on actual child well-being also. And for everything we've measured, we've seen significant improvements in all areas. So for our first step of evaluation, we compared participants' surveys before they started the Hope Groups to after they started the Hope Groups. And that's the results you're seeing here. So just to name a few, compared to before people did the Hope Groups to after, there were 62% increases in feelings of hopefulness about the future. There were also 57% decreases in symptoms of depression, 58% reduction in emotional violence of children, and 63% reductions in physical violence of children. So as you see, I mean, these are over 50% changes in these outcomes here. And if we'll go on to the next slide. So again, just going quickly here, let's just look at depression. We saw an average of 2 days per week reductions in depression for people who participated. And if you think about this, like we can all imagine the impact on your life of 2 days per week when you're not feeling depressed. I mean, these aren't small changes, they're meaningful changes that can really alter a parent's life, their relationships with their children, and then their children's well-being also. And if you'll go to the next slide. So these are all parenting outcomes or child well-being outcomes. And again, we saw improvements across all of them, but I'll just point out monitoring child. We saw about 2 days per week increases in parents having the capacity to know where their children are, to know who they're with. And you can think about the change in those children's lives if their parents are able to think about where they are and help keep them safe. And again, just to say, this matters because it can guide us. It can tell us that we're changing the outcomes that we care about changing, and that this program can really effectively and meaningfully change people's lives. And just to say, this is really just a testimony of how they've worked through the faithful dedication of these people here who built them and created them. I mean, this is, I think it's a testimony to show what they've built.
Thank you, Sydney. One thing that I love about the Hope Groups is that it's a very personal, we have very intentionally made it a very personal program. I don't even think it's a program, it's just relationships, really. And I'd like to end by sharing what one of our participants shared after she participated in a Hope Group. This is a Ukrainian who was internally displaced in Ukraine. After being in a Hope Group, life was divided into before and after. I learned to express my feelings correctly. I no longer feel like a victim. My relationships with people have improved, and my anxiety has disappeared. Now I feel great hope for my future. Thank you.
Wow.